Hi, everyone. I'm Raghu, and I'm back with Mindrolling. And I'm back with my friend Vincent Horn. Hi, Vincent.
Hey, good to be here.
He's my only friend in Asheville, where I live.
Yeah, that seems true. I've met some of your other friends. I think that's probably not true. But
Well, my only podcast friend. Let's put it that way.
That's probably
so
true.
It's great because, as you all know out there, I usually I do Skype stuff with everybody because they're all out of town, and it's the best way for me to get with them because I like to see them when I talk to them, right?
Yeah, it's nice.
And so in this case, I've got captured company.
Yeah, it's
So
kind of
great.
a pilgrimage to get out to your place, even from Asheville.
Oh, really?
A little bit.
Yeah, it's true. That's what I like about it.
Yeah.
You know? So I was just on. So Vince has a wonderful platform called Buddhist Geeks, and he's been doing that for a number of years. And it's of course he's got a wonderful podcast. Go to BuddhistGeeks.com and check it out. And in fact, just a week or two ago, I was on your podcast.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of fun. We did it
That
in a tea house. It was really cool.
A little loud at times.
Yeah, it worked out though.
Yeah.
And we actually talked about, because you're doing this wonderful series called Psychedelics and Buddhism. Can you tell? So now I got you.
Uh-oh.
What is the what's your intention here with this whole series, Buddhism and psychedelics?
Yeah, so a couple years ago, I had Dr. Roland Griffiths on Buddhist Geeks, who's the lead researcher at Johns Hopkins, and he's been the guy doing all the psilocybin research, all these different kinds of projects. And a mutual friend of ours connected us, and they were doing a study on advanced meditators using psilocybin for the first time. So people that have been doing a lot of meditation and had never had a psychedelic were then coming in and doing psychedelics. And they were sort of seeing, how was their experience like? How did it stack up to like their meditation background and their experience going on retreats? And so when I talked to him, I decided to out myself as being part of that category as well. I had, done a lot of meditation, never done any psychedelics. And then I got curious and tried psilocybin and did it a number of times after that. And so I sort of shared my personal story, and he encouraged me to do that. And it was kind of like, coming out of the closet in a certain way. And so that just got me thinking about how that conversation, although it's definitely started to happen, like Zigzag Zen, Alan, do you know Alan?
No.
Alan
I know
Badanier.
Zigzag.
Yeah, I don't know how to say his last name, so I apologize, Alan. But Zigzag Zen was like the only thing written about Buddhism and psychedelics for like years. And it seemed like that conversation was starting to like open up a little bit more. And so I thought it would be cool to kind of help continue to have that conversation about Buddhism and meditation and psychedelics and kind of how do those things interface, or do they? And so my intention was really to explore sort of the nuanced middle ground. Like I intentionally wanted to leave out any of the voices that said, psychedelics are always bad and can never have anything to do with Buddhist practice, and psychedelics are always good and everyone and should do them all the time.
Yeah.
And so I sort of said I want to leave out both of those perspectives and just focus on what I called the tolerant Buddhists, the people that are kind of like open to it, but not necessarily convinced it was that they could mix, and the psychedelic Buddhists, the people that thought there's some sort of interface there. So that was the purpose, is to sort of talk to those people in those camps and sort of explore the middle and explore the nuance. Yeah.
Okay, I think there's a great brand possible here for you to create, or we can both create it. TolerantBuddhists.com.
It's okay. Like that should be an oxymoron.
Yeah, right.
but it's strangely not.
Oh God. We're terrible. So wait, so tell me your personal experience and where there's parallels between the psychedelic experience and Buddhist meditative experience.
Well,
Or none, whatever.
I found there were parallels, and then things that were different too. So I did psilocybin on I think it was my 30th birthday, so about 4 years ago. And I did it with a group of friends, many of whom had done it before, and all of whom were meditators.
Oh, so it was a significant group then, certainly.
Yeah, there were like 5 or 6 of us,
Wow.
I think. And we sort of treated it like we would a retreat or a day-long practice session. We sort of had a structure where we talked about why we were there and why we wanted to do this, and we then took the psilocybin, the chocolate truffles or whatever, and then we sat together for some time until it started to come on.
Talk about Leary and Alpert's set and setting.
Yeah,
you followed that one.
Yeah, and
Wow.
we had the benefit of their experience to kind of lean on. And yeah, it was remarkably similar to me to like retreat experience, where except for a much faster version, where it felt like the same kind of initial excitement and focus and clarity, and then sort of morphing into some discomfort and confusion, and then getting really open and blissful and clear, and then it started to dissolve, and it's like sort of seeing my ego dying, and kind of like getting scared, and it was like the whole same. And then eventually that sort of opened it up into kind of clear, open awareness type space. And it was like the same cycles of consciousness and meditation, but kind of going through the psilocybin experience. And that's what I found remarkably similar.
Except, of course, if you just did it through a meditative retreat, that would happen over 10 days, 2 weeks, right? That sequence.
Yeah, it was a little.
It was putting it all into a few hours.
Yeah, it was. It was like a little bit faster and a little bit more trippy, for lack of a better term. It was like, and I'd never experienced meditating the same kind of visual effects.
Yeah.
I know some people do experience weird visual effects when they practice, but I usually don't. And so that was really fascinating, to see kind of the way that it altered visual perception. And I did it like 4 times over the course of the next month, sort of
with this group,
with the same, more or less,
basically,
yeah, more or less. Like some people would come and go, and every time I did a little bit higher dose. So I was kind of doing a sort of also, and this was the really fucked up part of this, is I was getting ready to host the Buddhist Geeks conference in a month. So the month leading up to the conference, I was doing these more and more bigger doses. And the last one I did was like a week before the conference. And during that one, I had the proverbial like bad trip, and like just had a total panic attack where it felt like I was dying. I was out on a walk with my friend, and suddenly like the panic just sort of hit me, and I just lay down on the ground and went through this whole like, sort of simulated death experience.
Wow.
And what was so interesting about that was that I was trying to use the meditative tools I'd learned to like kind of deal with it. And the experience wouldn't allow me to deal with it. It was like I couldn't note my way out of the experience or notice. I couldn't disembed from it. It was like it totally subsumed me, and so it really felt like a kind of ego death that unlike anything I had experienced before. And after that, I sort of lost touch with consensual reality for a few hours. After that, I really went mad for a little while. And then my sanity started to like recoagulate, and then I'd go mad again. For a few days, I was kind of coming in and out of consensual reality, and it really was like just like totally worthless. And this conference was coming up, like 3 days. So it was really it was really kind of scary. I almost went to the hospital at one point, to get sedatives or something, but was concerned, that they were gonna gonna throw me in the loony bin.
Oh shit.
Although I was in Boulder, so I probably shouldn't have worried that much.
Yeah, right.
I was like, oh, another
Another loony guy from the
another
Buddhist Geeks.
psychedelic tripper.
Yeah.
But I learned so much from that last one in particular. Like all the ones before that were all like mystical, blissful, unitive, earth connecting experiences. But it was really the last one where I lost my shit, where I really learned a lot. But it took like several months to realize that. And
And everybody out there, of course, this is not an advertisement or commercial for doing psychedelic
obviously
drugs. And this is proof of it. Okay.
Do you want to lose your mind?
Yeah.
Possibly.
Which is a good thing in the end. And of course, generally what you're forced into, in my experience with this, is surrender. You just, you get to the point where you just have to absolutely, it's okay. Whatever it is, madness, non-madness, whatever it is, you connect with that deeper part of yourself that allows the mind part to do its spin out, basically. So, and sometimes it does take a long time to integrate, but certainly anybody doing anything like this has to be in that set and setting framework and with people who love you, and that love generally will pull you through. I had a situation once where I also took a very intense dose of acid, which is far more intense than psilocybin, or can be, depending on the dosage. And I was with a few friends, and everything was fine. I was dying until I said to my friend, "You think we're okay?" And this schmuck said to me, "I don't know." That was it. I went off the deep end after that, for a while. I ended up at a crazy-ass nightclub at a Fugs concert. I don't know, people out there, you have to be a little bit more aged to know Tuli Kupferberg and Ed Sanders, who were poets in New York City, who put this band, the Fugs, together. They were wild. I mean, completely wild. They were so wild, they brought me out of this crazy ass, mind warp that I went into while I was trying to avoid surrendering in that moment. Yeah, this is cautionary tale as much as anything else, right?
Yeah, totally.
But the work that is being done, back to your original thing of you having that guy on, I can't remember his name, who's doing that stuff.
Yeah,
John Hopkins.
Roland Griffiths.
Yeah, and Roshi Joan Halifax told me she's been involved also. And there's tremendously great work around PTSD, around addiction, around death and dying, that is being done with psilocybin and also MDMA, which Rick Doblin, who I had on a podcast, we talked about, and he's done tremendous work around that. It is really effective, so effective that the government, pre this current government, I mean, the current, attorney general says that marijuana is more evil than heroin or some crazy ass shit. I mean, this maniac. Sorry about that, folks. If anyone thinks Jeff Sessions is great, then, I'll learn to live with that. But many universities like Johns Hopkins, not many, but a number of them have been granted license to be able to experiment with particularly, I think, more psilocybin, but somewhat also MDMA, and they're proving this out, that it is helping, especially people, soldiers coming back who have tremendous PTSD, and so on, addiction and death and dying. So it is very efficacious, and I'm totally behind more of this kind of work, and I think what you're doing with psychedelics and Buddhism, or Buddhist meditation, I think is a great parallel, and the fact that you experimented with it yourself and are telling this story is wonderful.
Thank you.
Very good for you. which brings me to another subject here. Just even though I come from the Bhakti tradition,
Mm-hmm.
of course, we were, as many of you out there have heard this podcast, so you know that Maharaji Neem Karoli Baba, when we were in India, he didn't tell us to do anything, but he would say funny things like, "Are you going to the course?" In Hindi, he'd say, but in English, you go, "Course? You going to the course?" Meaning Vipassana courses, which were Buddhist meditation courses, which, as you'll remember, Jack Cornfield and Sharon Salzberg and Joseph Goldstein brought back from the East, Vipassana. They, to me, they have done more single-handedly or triple-handedly for people getting basic grounding practice than anybody in this country, any teacher that's come here. I mean, I really feel that about them. And you can check them out if anybody's just listening to this podcast for the first time. Go to BeHereNowNetwork.com, and they all have wonderful podcasts. Some extemporaneous, like this thing we're doing now, Vince and I, and some actual talks that they've given that we wrap up into podcasts. One of the big bywords in the West, certainly, and for a long time, pretty much along the same theme as quote unquote the new age, right? I mean, Krishnadas and I, by the way, started a record company, Triloka Records, in the 90s, right? We started it basically to offer an alternative to new age music. Okay, so we were doing really substantial world music, interspersed with pop and stuff like that. And so the other big thing, which is still a huge thing, and it's a big seller in the book market, is quote unquote self-help. And so there was some stuff that I read in my wonderful what is this one? Tricycle, which is a great magazine, by the way. Here's the opening quote from an article by Brett Ryder. Actually, it's not Brett Ryder. Who is this? Alex Caring-Label, who's the associate editor. Even if we wouldn't be caught dead in the self-help section of the bookstore, that's me. The truth of the matter is that we're all self-help disciples. We have a habit of endlessly evaluating everything, from our jobs to our hobbies to our relationships, with one self-serving question in mind. How can I be better? How can I do better? Etc. Right? How true is that? I mean, the fact that we wake up in the morning with the I, me, mine syndrome, goes a long way to support everything that he's saying here. The other part of this, which I'd love for you to comment on, is the part that we all feel like there's a self, and we're going to control through ourselves, through willpower, what it is that our evolvement as human beings. Like he quotes, like the little alien pulling the levers inside the cockpit of a human body. That kind of self, according to Buddhist philosophy, does not exist. Buddhism, then, can teach us what the self in self-help is and isn't. So in your experience, talk about how, we all came up with this idea, and we are from the West, and it's all about being the doer. So how do we reconcile this with the reality of no self? And in this case, I don't even get into the tremendous philosophical thing about no self versus soul and all of that, but more the empty of self-interest self. So how do we attack this when we're brought up in such a tremendous vacuum of the reality of letting go? We are control freaks.
Mm. Well, I don't know where this is going to go, but
it can go anywhere. That's the beauty of what we're doing.
One thing I didn't share when we were talking earlier about the psychedelic experience is, and you were talking about surrender, which was very much how I was trying to orient to that whole process, for the days that I was kind of like losing my mind and coming to and losing my mind. I was like, okay, I do need to surrender
What do you
to
mean?
this process.
Tell us losing the mind.
Meaning I stopped being able to know conceptually who I was and what was happening, but in a way that I couldn't interact normally. Not like I see that all concepts are empty and that the self is a construct, but like I've lost touch with the ability to even navigate this reality at all. Like totally confused and just like not in the same reality as other people.
Your wife must have loved you.
Oh man, she scared the shit out of her, and she loved me a lot.
Oh yeah,
she was really she really supported me quite a bit.
Because that's the antidote. By the way, everybody out there, as long as you're with someone who loves you or who is a loving being, doesn't have to be a I love you kind of thing. You're okay. You can let go. It's losing contact with your mind is okay if there's enough love. So remember that whenever anybody decides to embark on a journey like this.
What was really strange, though, in terms of like the turning point for me and being able to like function well enough to show up at the conference and host it, which I did a so-so job at. But one of my colleagues and friends, after about 4 days of this, I was really starting to get scared. I'm not going to be able to host this thing. I'm not going to be able to function. And she said to me, you could just decide to stop and just kind of decide to get out of this. And it sort of hadn't occurred to me that could be possible. And so I tried. I said, okay, I'm done with this. And I'm going to just like come back. And almost immediately, I felt my sort of normal thinking mind start to recoalesce. And so it was, oddly enough, it was a kind of movement of will or determination to move out of this state.
Interesting.
That allowed it to, at least in retrospect, how I understand it, that was a pivotal thing for me. So it made me wonder, like, are there healthy forms of will or choice or self, kind of action, and are there potentially unhelpful or unhealthy ways to surrender? Because I realized looking back that I was surrendering, but I also felt kind of victimized by the experience. Like, and so to me, that really brought up a strange paradox, because all I've done is this sort of selflessness Buddhist practice, and sort of see that this self is a construct, and it's kind of images appearing and feelings and like all these kind of things that come together like a mirage that seem like me, but really they're made up of all these component sensory experiences, and there's not like a real thing there.
Yeah.
But strangely still, there's some sort of power in like intention and volition and choice, for lack of a better term. So I don't actually know how to reconcile that. But I do get what you're saying about the self-help part of, people kind of being like constantly obsessed with improving themselves and thinking that there is a sort of solid like thing in there
that
they can fix.
Yeah.
And that seems, like that's a really sad situation, I think, when we get stuck in that loop.
This reminds me of something, and I have brought this up on Mindrolling before. It's a little bit of a story. It's just apropos for what we're talking about exactly. We were in India with Neem Karoli Baba and Ram Dass. We were all hanging with Maharaji in a house in Allahabad. And he said to Maharaji, "Is it not true that karma, action, and grace are the same?" Okay. And Maharaji said, "That is not something I can talk about in public." He didn't say it like that. This is our rational. He went, "Night, no talk about that." Whatever he would say. And Ram Dass went away and thought, That's interesting. And then later, he got a message from one of the Indian devotees saying, Maharaji told me to tell you, Ramdas, you and I understand each other very well. And Ramdas then thought, oh, okay, I get it. They are the same, but there's no rational way of understanding that. You cannot put that into a thing where you can intellectually understand how they are the same whatsoever. One day, not too many years ago, I was with our Indian mother, whose name is Siddhima, and who had been with Maharaji forever, is a saint in her own right. And I told her this story. And I said, Ma, so what is the reality here? She said, it is true. They are one. But you cannot understand that. So you need to act as if they are not, and do what you need to do, and take action as if that action is will have the results that you are looking for. And that, to me, was a fantastic explanation of what we're talking about now. And certainly what you did. You took that action in that moment, and it resulted in, a breakthrough, so that you reassembled the pieces. On another level, it was all written that this was going to happen, and that you had the grace from within, Buddha mind, whatever, however it is that we all have that something inside that is guiding us. And that created the situation where you was preordained that you would take that action.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
It sort of does, in that it feels like there's a deep paradox going on.
Yeah.
And even when I think about, the practice of surrender, which for me is kind of like having the intention to let go and relax into whatever's there. That intention and that, like, the effort that it takes to let go. Sometimes there is an effort required, it seems like to me, to do that. And then other times maybe it's like I get stung by a bee. We talked about getting stung by yellow jackets, and it didn't feel like there's any choice. Like I just
you run your ass down that street screaming,
and then almost pass out and go, let go. So that's interesting, and I wonder if what we're calling self, it's like we're somehow connecting self with this idea of the one who does things, or the one who has intentions. And from the Buddhist meditative standpoint, and from the Jack and Joseph and Sharon and that sort of tradition, intention is just one of the aggregates of experience, one of the aspects of experience that that is coming and going.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the practices I've done there were really about noticing and almost kind of being aware of intention as something that kind of ebbs and flows in experience, and not identifying like intention is not me or not mine.
Right. With what we are truly made up of, which we can't name really. Every different tradition tries to name, and consciousness may be a good name, and it certainly arises from there. There's another quote from this article which I love. While much of the self-help literature limits itself to providing a combination of information and techniques, Buddhism aims to generate insight. I think this is a key thing, particularly into the status of the self, with the aim of ridding us of the selfish desires that often spur our quest for betterment in the first place. And I think that's just a key right there and then, to really the efficacy of Buddhist practice. Because once that starts to happen and you stop thinking about yourself all the time, and you start thinking about somebody around you, and then you expand that out with into like metta practice,
or karma yoga,
then you really are putting yourself out to make changes. You've made a change inside yourself that now is going to affect many people. So I think that's a beautiful thing right there.
when you were on Buddhist Geeks, you used the term self-cherishing,
Yeah.
and I've been thinking about that term and why that's so interesting, because it's like it doesn't assume that there isn't a self. It just sort of says that the problem is like sort of cherishing self, or having like this kind of like too much love for the self, a certain kind of love that's like unhealthy or
Right.
an attachment based, kind of love.
Cherishing the illusory
Yes.
self that we all identify with.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a big problem. Now, here's a funny.
Well, hold
thing.
on. Is it illusory?
The illusory self?
Yeah. What do you mean by the illusory self?
That which we identify as the I.
Okay.
This is all Ramana Maharshi. By the way,
Yeah.
this is really great. Yesterday, I did a podcast with a man in India who wrote a book that is like been the definitive Ramana Maharshi. You know Ramana Maharshi.
Oh,
which,
yeah.
Who's an Advaitist, so very similar to Buddhist thought.
Hardcore.
Yeah. And so we had this fantastic conversation, and he knew so many great stories and so on and so forth. And, the I, the eradication of the I was a major thing of you keep asking, well, who am I?
Who am I? Yeah.
Who is that I? The self-inquiry thing. So I think that's one of the most respectable practices in the Advaita tradition, or even, and to me, this is such a parallel with Buddhism, to practice that. So that illusory I that's what I mean by the illusory I, the identification with that which is just a set of aggregates that we develop over a lifetime to identify ourselves.
Okay, so I'm with you, and at the same time, I'm sort of remembering back to this contemplative Hinduism class I took at Naropa.
Oh,
and the teacher's name was Sri Devi Bringi, and she was awesome. She was a great teacher. And one time she said, there's one thing that I remember when she was talking about Advaita Vedanta, and she was talking about these different sort of Indian spiritual approaches, and she was talking about Vedanta and Tantra as two kind of general paths. And she said the main difference from her point of view was Vedanta was the neti, not this, not this, not this, not this, not until you go, till there's nothing left, to identify with. And then she said, but the tantric path is I am this too, this too, this too, this too, this too. And she said they led to the same kind of non-conceptual realization, but that the way that they got there was like the opposite.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, does that seem related in some way, to what we're talking about? Is there a way to kind of, include? Because I've done the neti thing, like, and I find now more helpful to sort of try to include more in my self concept, like to expand it, so that it's not just so small and self-centered, but it's like more inclusive and like includes everything.
Yeah. I would say, in my own experience, the neti path, you get so caught in your mind with that stuff. I think it's a very difficult thing. I think very difficult. I think the Advaita path, period, is more difficult because we are so attached to knowing, quote unquote. I mean, so it's very difficult. The path of Tantra, of just merging and absorbing and going through. It's basically what bhakti is, right?
I was going to ask, like, is that sort of like Maharaji? Was that sort of the way he was?
No, he was completely Advaita.
Oh, really?
In fact, when you walked into the temple, it's no longer there because they changed the entrance and all that. It was called the Shri 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 Neem Karoli Baba Hanuman Advait, something like that. Krishnadas remembers it better than I. Non-dual ashram. Non-dual Hanuman, a non-dual Neem Karoli Baba. I mean, it's really pretty far out. Yeah. No, this was a being that was not living in duality, period. And what state is that once you get there? It's love. There isn't anything else. It's a shitty word because it doesn't really say what it is. But the actual tradition is it's subject to object. Okay, you have a guru. It's the grace of the guru. You are worshiping the guru. You are worshiping Hanuman, Christ, whoever it may be, and ultimately that evaporates once, as Ramana Maharshi, who we were just talking about, one of his most famous sayings is, God, Guru, and Self are one. And that's where you eventually get to. So, that, they say, is the easy path now in the age that we're in of destruction, Kali Yuga, right? The Hindus say. So, I think the path of Tantra is easier isn't the right word, but I think it's with us in the West being so addicted to our minds. I mean, that's why Buddhism, especially Tibetan Buddhism, is so the crystal clarity of the expression of what reality is so phenomenal. I mean, I'm so attracted by it. I mean, it's not the only, but pretty much that's what I like to read in my leisure time, which I don't get much of because of doing these podcasts and about people's books and stuff. I have to read their books. So I do appreciate the quicksand that can put you in, because it is so entrancing, the crystal clarity of that. And that's why I actually appreciate how Maharaji, he had us get, without telling us to do anything, it just happened. But we had a real grounding in Buddhist meditation, period. And he even, he, like the biggest praise he gave to other quote unquote gurus, saints, enlightened beings, whatever, really were the Tibetans. As wild as it is. I mean, one day I was going to, this is a real diversion, Vince. I don't know.
It's okay. I'm following.
I don't know if I told you this before, but I was living high in the Himalayas, doing a meditation thing. Was going to be with Munindra, who was a great Buddhist teacher who was going to come, and he couldn't come at the last minute, and we were all up there, me, Ram Das, Krishnadas, and others. And I had my passport needed to be renewed, so I stopped by Kenchi on the way where Maharaji was. And, he just saw me for a few minutes, and I just wanted a blessing to go on down to Delhi and get my passport. And he said, you just had a meeting with a Tibetan Lama, Darshan? I go, no, I never met a Tibetan in my life. You mean Munindra, who was going to teach it? Nay, Tibet Lama. You had meet with him for half an hour. He gave you Tibetan teachings? I go, no, Maharaji, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, ciao. And off I went down to Delhi.
The timeline was screwy maybe, huh?
Yeah, the timeline was screwier than hell. And I go down there and I went to get my passport at the the High Commissioner's house. And I had heard they were letting Tibetans into Canada. And I said to him, is it true they're letting Tibetans into Canada? He said, yeah, as a matter of fact. And he just looked behind, and out a door came a retinue of monks with Kalu Rinpoche at the head of it. Kalu Rinpoche was one of the greatest Tibetan lamas of the last century, okay? I flipped out. Talk about, I had taken a drug. How could he? First of all, I'm with this incredible being. Secondly, how could he know all that stuff, mind shatter. And then we went and had this incredible lunch. He sat across from me. I went, at one point, some Canadian guys said, oh, we're going to interview him. Do you want to come along with us? I said, sure. We went into a small room. These two guys, me and the interpreter and Kalu Rinpoche, and he was bored shitless talking to these guys because he wouldn't even look at them. They were asking him stupid questions about Christianity. I don't know anything about Christianity. And then they said to me, well, why don't you talk to him? And as soon as they did that, he sat straight up in his chair and contacted me like a laser. And I asked him questions about meditation. And I had been in the mountains. It's so good meditating. And I had, in this spacious atmosphere. But now I'm in the city and I can't handle it, and I can't keep my focus or anything. And he said, no, you don't. I said, do you have to be in a cave? Not a cave, but in the country, whatever. And he said, no, you must be like the 7 Siddhas of India, who all became realized through work. One was a weaver, one was a potter, etc., etc. And he gave me teachings like that for about a half an hour. And I walked out, I was stoned like on acid for about a week after that, okay? Because it was just, it was beyond the beyond. So these kinds of things, that happen in one's life that make up the fabric of connecting you to who you really are, it's like it's very much, it was similar to I didn't take a drug, but I took a drug. And similar to what happened to you, where there was this mind shattering. That's basically what happened to you in my eyes. And, that's what I hear from you.
Sure.
So, that's just, it's a marvelous thing, but it's a scary thing. And again, we urge everybody, set and setting, make sure you're with somebody who really loves you, okay, before you enter into this field, especially if you're younger. But obviously, this is, Ram Dass and all of us back in the day, this was what introduced us to that thing that we call higher consciousness itself. So, yeah, so back to the I and the self. I think, this thing that is in the magazine that I just read about, the great thing about Buddhism is it gives you that field of perception, platform from which to really be able to clear out the identification with that, and I called it illusory self.
Yeah. Yeah, and that seems like a really important thing to do, and it's, I guess to me, it's kind of like a maturation process, like human development. I guess because I hang out with a lot of people who are practicing, I sort of forget how important that is as a first step. But then the thing I see a lot more frequently is when people, swing too far toward clearing out the self and sort of disengage from their lives, or think spirituality is this sort of transcendent super space somewhere,
right?
And then have really struggle, and I did as well, at certain phases in my practice to come back in to life, to see that, like you're saying, Kala Rinpoche's teaching, that there's nothing less profound or spiritual about, cleaning the dishes,
right?
Or picking up my son from daycare, than sitting on a cushion and doing some sort of contemplative technique.
Yeah.
There's nothing inherently better about that situation from a certain standpoint, in terms of what's being offered.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, on the one hand, I think that's sort of quote unquote advanced practice, but on the other hand, it's also always the case.
It's day to day, absolute day to day, be here now practice. Absolutely. And I have always remembered that those teachings that I got from Kala Rinpoche as being probably some of the most important transmission that I ever got, because I had such naivete about the spiritual path. I mean, I was young and, just learning all this stuff, but to this day that has stayed with me, absolutely stayed with me. And so I really think that it's so important to integrate the practice side of it, not just when, as you just said, not just when you're sitting on your cushion, but when you're acting day to day and following whatever your path may be. And that's why, and we did, I'm happy, the other night, so we do kirtan, that's a major practice, chant, from
it's a
our
lovely
tradition.
practice.
Yeah. And I think, I'm glad you came. Vince came the other night. It was the first time he'd been with us doing that. And I just think that there's a way in which that kind of practice gets it transcends the mental formulations. It's no different than a meditative. It's the same. It is a meditative practice, but there's a way in which the music and the doing of it yourself brings you into an opening place, that connects you with the heart place. And that's what I've been trying to say actually about what we got from Neem Karoli Baba was a combination when he urged our foundation in meditative practice. He urged so many of us now that are part of that tradition really have taken a lot of Tibetan teachings, and a couple of them are, like Danny Goleman is very close to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And I think that there is a way to really look at the combination of heart practice and basic meditative practice, and then, of course, using, reading where you can really learn mindfulness and so on and so forth. I think that, that's a clear thing. And the other thing, though, that I saw in one of the other articles in this publication, which I loved, was about happiness.
Mm-hmm.
What about happiness?
Mm-hmm.
This author went and did some Zen practice, and the Zen, I guess one of the monks said, it doesn't really matter how happy we are, right? And he said, throughout my childhood and adolescence, my mother often asked, why can't you ever be content? My whole life I've been striving to manipulate my experience in order to achieve some set of conditions, some state of mind that always eluded me. Now I felt I could let go of that. I remember looking at the face of the monk and seeing through the pines the white gleam of a volcanic peak that suddenly looked as though it was about to explode with happiness. And again, this is another little story of Maharaji, but I think this is really important because there's a kind of happiness that's it's without the kind of depth of reality, and it's something in the West that's all we want. Is money going to make you happy? Is your partner going to make you happy? Is your work going to make you happy? And that's not the kind of happiness. I think this happiness is more of a deep contentment with what is. And I was in India, and my father came to visit my brother and I. And as Maharaji said to him, why did you come? What'd you come to India for? He said, well, I wanted to see my sons, see how they were doing. He said, how are they doing? My father said, well, they seem to be happy. And Maharaji said, happiness is everything. And I got that in that moment, meaning not the superficial happiness which we're all aware of and have strived for our whole lives, but more about contentment, a deep contentment with the moment.
Yeah.
What's been your experience in that, in your life and your practice?
Well, the first thought that came to mind is kind of in terms of the distinction that you're making, more of a conceptual framework that I found helpful. I talked about my experience too, but Shinzen Young, who's an American Dharma teacher, he has a good phrase and good distinction there, which is there's the happiness dependent on conditions and happiness independent of conditions.
That's good.
And you're talking, I think you're talking, pointing to the happiness independent
of conditions.
And and the interesting thing is how we're seeking to get more happiness that's contingent on conditions, thinking that's going to give us the independent happiness, conflating the two and thinking that they're the same.
Yeah.
And so, like in my experience with practice, it really did help me start to get the difference between those two, and to see that there was something that was fundamentally okay, even when like my whole, ego structure was dissolving, and I was, and there's freaking out and terror and, total groundlessness. Like even that was okay, on some level. It's all groundless, so there's nothing actually to be worried about since it's all groundless anyway.
Yeah, right.
So something about that, which is hard to put into words, but it's sort of a glimpse of of a kind of happiness that's not, it's not like not a thing or an experience, but it's just like, it's just the field of experience just doing what it does, and being okay with what it is. Because like, what else could it be?
Yeah.
It's something like that. And so for me, realizing that was like it's like, oh my God, that's like, this is what I've been looking for. This is what I've been seeking for, this whole time. And then, but at the same time, it's like it's so damn simple and so hard to put into words. And it's not like I couldn't like wear it around as a badge, like, or like it didn't give me anything, particularly,
Right.
except a certain kind of like deep existential, like okayness.
Yeah.
And so, it's like I've noticed that there is a sort of process of integration, that I still feel like I'm in, of sort of being okay, not knowing, and
Perfect.
yeah,
Yeah. Being okay with not knowing. Yeah. That's real happiness. That's real deep contentment. To get to that place. Yeah. Yeah. That's well said. This trip you had, I didn't, we've never really talked about it, I guess, not even outside of talking about it in front of thousands of people.
yeah.
Is a game changer, I would say. I mean, not to be too dramatic about it, but
No, but I mean, it was a game changer, because part of what it made me realize is like the whole time I'd been meditating, I had been subtly trying to control my experience with meditation. Like there was some part of what I was learning in those skills of like noticing and being present with and noting and feeling and like all the skills, I was still using them to subtly try to like deal and cope
yeah,
with experience, even though they brought a lot of freedom and happiness, and I touched into that independent of conditions thing. Like this experience just, it ripped all of that away from me, and it sort of showed me that like I really wasn't in control. And that was sort of terrifying from a certain point of view. But it really, after that, I really like, I was stripped of this idea that that meditation was going to get me something,
beautiful.
And so I didn't really meditate a whole lot after that. Actually, it's taken me years to come back into
Right.
doing a formal practice.
Yeah, but it's probably way more real, meaning, it's not at the less of the mind stuff of why am I doing this? I mean, it's taken me years too. I just sit down there. Oh yeah, I'm not feeling it, or shit, that didn't do so good yesterday. God, I was just thinking about shit the whole time. I never think about any of that. It's just a doing, and that took a long time. So I don't know if I had that at 34, whatever, but maybe. I don't remember. That's the other beauty. Yeah, being okay with not knowing, to me, is that's a brass ring. That's a big brass ring. That's amazing. There was something else. There's something else that I read in another one of these publications, actually, that I've never really talked about it on a podcast, maybe peripherally, but it's this thing is called the spirit of reverence, and he talks about his. This is another Chinese Chan Zen teacher who said to him, in between your rounds of meditation, practice bowing. This is a little bit like what I've been talking about, the combination of your meditative practice, Buddhist meditative practice, using intellect to help understand and move forward, and then the heart practices. In between your rounds of meditation, practice bowing, offering incense, and making certain circumambulations, if you have no spirit of reverence, no feeling of awe for all that lies beyond the confines of that miserably circumscribed illusion you suppose to be your quote-unquote me, you will make no progress. Why? Because when your practice improves, you will reflect, I did better in my meditation just now, and by so thinking fall back to the lowest level of ignorance owing to the constant inflation of your devilish eye. Isn't that great? This is by actually John Blofield, who's a very well-known teacher. And it made this made me think of situations that I had been in. We have right now, Vince is looking at one of my dogs going, what do you want? She's part of this little...
she wants to jump on the mic, I think, and contribute.
Her name is Leela, by the way.
Oh, beautiful. The dance.
She's the dance. Many people, of course, make fun of the idea that you would, just the bowing down before another human being. And I have had this experience where and I've told you this before, I might have mentioned it in the podcast I did with you or in the last podcast we did. And I've certainly mentioned it many times here, that my first experience in India with a guru was this bowing down and act of reverence, and just flipped me out. I couldn't do it. I mean, I did it, but I was just like, what the, And then my experience I had meeting Neem Karoli Baba the first time, there was no thought. It was like, shit, I just got down on the ground because I was completely overwhelmed by the presence of that which we cannot name, right? That, to me, is the only nomenclature I can put to this, saying guru, God, holy man, all of it, it's all constructs that I could never get with. From that time when I was a kid, I could never get with it. Just the presence of what is that we could not name. And in fact, one of the best stories I have recently, I was in the middle of a jungle with an amazing, amazing yogi, Baba. And we were doing a lot of chanting and so on. And a guy came, a young guy, he was like 20 years old. He came and he played drums. Well, and I was doing some chanting. He was fantastic. I mean, he was extraordinary. I mean, I was so happy I had somebody like him playing with me, And anyhow, so everybody was leaving, and he came to say goodbye, and he came with his friend. His friend said to the Baba, this guy didn't want to come here. He had no desire to come here and meet you. So Baba goes, why not? Well, what was the deal? And he said, how did I know I'd be in the presence of the divine? How did I know? And I just thought, right. He had a spontaneous reaction to, you could only be reverent in front of such a thing, And this isn't, enlightened, not enlightened, but obviously this being was very well placed in that thing that we cannot name, at the very least. And so he this is a natural, to me, outflow that we have, and it doesn't have to be in front of a being. It's your experience very much was being in there's a reverence that I can hear in your voice, not just that one, but through the four experiences that you had with psilocybin, right? Related to the being in this practice with the people that you did it with and so on. Would you not say that's true? Would you have used that word in relation to this experience?
Yeah, I think so. I think there was a feeling of reverence to the mystery in terms of what we were exploring, and sort of having good enough sense to know that we didn't know what was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a feeling of kind of like reverence, trepidation too, like, this is a little scary. I mean, the mystery is like, like I feel a sense of reverence, but also a sense of like healthy fear, like this is, I'm dealing with forces that are greater, and that, don't necessarily, care about what I think are important right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They care about kind of ripping that shroud off.
Yeah. That's what they care about. There isn't anything else. I mean,
and there's the reverence. It's like, okay,
yeah.
I'm here.
Yes, exactly. And that's exactly what happened to us with this particular being, Neem Karoli Baba in India.
Interesting. He was like he was like a living psychedelic.
Yeah. A living psychedelic. And Ram Dass has said, the fact that I took all those psychedelics before I went to India and met this being prepared me for being able to absorb it in a way that I don't think I could have had I not have. And again, we're not endorsing psychedelics, but we are in reverence to their effectiveness. And Maharaji himself, Neem Karoli Baba, said, good, very good, for first time they allow you to have, you know what he said exactly? They allowed you to have darshan, right? Be in the presence of Christ. He talked to us about Christ. Christ was, because that's what we know in the West, right? He was Jewish too, so, for all of us, a lot of us were Jews, and then it came there, that allowed us to have darshan, okay, be in the presence for a few hours, and then he said you have to leave. Ultimately, best to feed people, serve people. That will get you high. I mean, he didn't say get you high. But so there is certainly an initial, and as you experienced, unraveling and connectivity to that which we can't name, the mystery, and then and then you got hammered, big time, right? And we, in that sense, we got hammered by him day to day, just shattering mind stuff, and the mirror was pretty horrible. Seeing who, the manifestation of who we weren't was on a day-to-day basis hard to bear.
Oh yeah.
And it so it was pretty interesting, but I think it's really important, reverence for that mystery. Reverence for the not knowing is as important as the reverence of this guy, this drummer, sitting in front of this Baba and going, how did I know I'd be in front of the divine presence? How did I know? And I think that innocence and, that's what Christ said, you have to be like a child to really know God. And I think that's part of that reverence. What do you think?
I got nothing.
I
think we've exhausted words.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we have too. Well, it's a podcast. We could sit in silence, which we probably should do too. But thank you, and really appreciate you coming over here.
Yeah,
and sharing space and time.
Thank you for the chai too.
Yeah,
the delicious chai.
Okay, now that everybody, dogs are attacking
they know it's
him,
over.
It's over now.
They know
How do you know it's over? We're still talking. Oh, God.
They can feel it. They can feel it.
Well, this is Mindrolling and the Be Here Now Network. Go to BeHereNowNetwork.com and check it all out. And thank you, Vincent. And
thank you.
Everybody check out BuddhistGeeks.com and check out the podcast that Vince has up there. And let's do this again.
Love to.
See you next week, everybody. Namaste.